Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today I'll be reviewing the new PUP album, Who Will Look After the Dogs. This is the fifth album from the Canadian pop-punk band PUP, and given with their previous album, The Unraveling of PUP the Band, definitely being a league below the most of the rest of their material, it did, of course, cause my expectations for this album to be quite mixed. But something that really does impress me is just how much harder they go on this album, given that by now I'm sure we are all used to the trope of a rock or metal band just watering down their sound and going more pop-leaning as they go. However, for PUP, that could not be further from the case, with this album having some of their heaviest material to date, which is something that the album establishes pretty much immediately on the opening track No Hope, which just comes straight in with this very fast and aggressive guitar playing and the vocals as well. And in a way actually reminds me a lot of Bad Brains' debut album. I think they're both on a very comparable level of cutting to the chase. And this track, despite being only just under 2 minutes, still manages to cover so much ground. Wolf Garden then just does a really good job at keeping that momentum going, and on the whole is just much more melodic and less full-on, which is a nice change. The vocals really feel like there is a lot more passion on this track as well as the guitar playing just has a lot more diversity, both of which being some of my absolute favourite elements of this song. Concrete has this absolutely amazing chugging bass line as well as the super distorted guitars during the chorus, and all of that just really comes together for one of the heaviest tracks on the album, and as well as the very bleak and nihilistic lyrics that really just fit how the song sounds. And despite that, there is still a lot of humour and a lot of sarcasm in this track as well, which is of course a classic PUP combination. Get Dumber featuring Jeff Rosenstock opens with this really fun guitar riff, but still manages to commit to the much more post-hardcore sound, but still just manages to be one of the most fun and playful tracks on the whole album, just with the very chaotic guitars and the vocals as well, which are absolutely all over the place but in the best way possible. Hunger for Death has this really nice and seemingly heartfelt intro, of course, until you look at the lyrics and you see that there is still so much sarcasm involved. This track eventually does get a lot heavier and goes into the more post-hardcore side of the sound, however definitely has much more of a focus on the melodic side of things, just with how much longer it takes to get to the post-hardcore stage compared to many of the other songs. Needed to Hear It then just goes straight back to the much more chaotic, crazy and dissonant sound of the rest of the album, which I think even with a handful of breather tracks is becoming a little bit tiresome by this point. I will give this track credit where it's due for just again being slightly more melodic, but the very shouty vocals along with the still very crazy and chaotic drumming and guitar playing is still just a little bit too full on for my liking. Paranoid opening with the much quieter instrumentation I must say is quite an interesting production choice, especially with the much louder vocals happening at the same time, but luckily this does only last for the intro and it does become a lot more balanced as the song goes, just with the absolutely incredible energy that the song has definitely being one of the most fun and dynamic tracks so far. And the bridge of this track as well just feels like a much more actualized version of the intro, with the distortion on the guitars just being a lot heavier and just a much better sound mixed in with everything else happening on the song. Falling Out of Love definitely is one of the more lacking songs on the album, with so many of the parts just feeling really repetitive, with pretty much every aspect of the song really feel like it's taking a backseat, just making the overall energy on this track a lot more lacking. I must give it to the chorus on this track though, still very anthemic, which has to be one of my, if not my favourite thing about it. Always is definitely a much more classic sounding PUP song, being the much more melodic pop punk as opposed to the more post-hardcore of the rest of the album, which is very intense. The song is great not only because it acts as a breather from the intensity of the rest of the album, but genuinely is just a great song on its own as well that showcases some genuinely great musicianship from the band. Rule does feel somewhat like a bit of a filler song, with it offering very little that another song can't just do a lot better. There's nothing actually that wrong with it, but compared to pretty much every other song on the album it does feel very tame. But then Best Revenge showcases what has to be some of the absolute best and most passionate vocals on the album. I also absolutely love the piano during the bridge, being an instrument that's not really been seen all that much throughout the album. However, the piano along with the absolutely incredible guitar riff on this part of the track creates one of my absolute favourite moments on the whole album. And then Shut Up is just a very classic sounding PUP closing track, with it starting quite soft but it's still teasing you and showing you that it's really going to build at some point. And eventually it does then build towards this amazing and very grand and powerful ending that leaves you with a lot to think about. And so I'm really glad to see somewhat of a return to form from PUP, taking their sound in a very different and unexpected direction that actually works really well. And like I said before, it's just very relieving to see that they aren't going for the classic and typical trope of a rock band going more pop, but instead they are just taking their sound to a whole new level and making it even heavier than it ever has been. But still, of course, mixed in with a lot of the classic PUP things, like something that I mentioned a couple of times just being the very sarcastic but still somewhat humorous lyrics that are still managing to be so self-deprecating. And so while this album is definitely a step up from the unraveling of PUP the Band in 2022, too. I still think there is still a way to go before they can quite reach the same level as Morbid Stuff, which I think is unequivocally their best album, but it is definitely a huge step in the right direction. And so I'll be giving this album a 7 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching this review. Please be sure to listen to this album yourself and tell me your thoughts below. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.